Hello again. My name is Landon Kronberger, and I'm the Chief Development Officer at WAMU. As a public media organization, our mission is to connect listeners and members like you to each other and around the world. Public radio works because listeners and members who value the service step up and give back. Today, I'm proud to announce that this event is being co-sponsored by the Nantucket Book Festival, so we welcome everybody from Nantucket. This support for public media comes from the public, and support from listeners and members is also our most reliable and important source of funding, especially right now. This author series would not be possible without your support. So if you're enjoying this special author series, please consider making an additional donation at dianerehm.org/give. Just so you know, this event is being recorded and closed captioning is available. Just click the button on your screen. And now let's start the conversation with the host of our author series, Diane Rehm.
Thank you, Lynn. And thanks to those of you who were with us for the last hour as we spoke about the book Caste. Welcome back. And to those of you who are joining us now, I'm so glad for us to be together for this very special conversation with Isabel Wilkerson. Over the years, Isabel joined me many times to offer insights and analysis about the symbolism of the Confederate flag, the legacy of Jim Crow laws, and the role race plays in policing. Isabel Wilkerson is the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of The Warmth of Other Suns and Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. These best-selling books have highlighted the lived experiences of ordinary Black Americans and offered us a new lens to view the inequalities in our country. You can submit your questions for Isabel in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Isabel, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always such a joy to be in conversation with you, even under these circumstances.
Indeed, indeed. And, you know, you and I might talk for just a moment about how we grew up really in the same neighborhood, in the same area. How did it come to be that your family moved to Washington and you ended up going to Roosevelt High School, where I went as well?
Well, I mean, this all speaks to the work that I do with The Warmth of the Suns and with Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents, is that I am a daughter of the Great Migration. I am one of the millions of people Americans who wouldn't even exist had there not been migration in their background, if their parents or grandparents or great-grandparents had not come from a long ways away to search for something better, looking for freedom, and meeting people they otherwise wouldn't have met, and thus creating whole new lineages. And so I'm a daughter of the phenomenon that I wrote about in The Warmth of the Suns. My mother migrated from Georgia, and my father migrated from Southern Virginia to Washington, D.C., which was part of the route of the Great Migration, one of the three routes, and this was the East Coast route. And that's what they followed. And they met and married, had me, and thus a whole new lineage is born when you realize the importance and centrality really of migration in people's lives. In addition to that, of course, the I am also the daughter, thus, of people who were survivors of Jim Crow. And their experiences, which I must say they did not speak about, people who endured the trauma of that regime that lasted for nearly 100 years in our country and did not end until the 1970s. It had such a lasting impact on people that they often did not speak about it with their own children and grandchildren. So I didn't grow up with them talking about what they endured. I absorbed the pain and the sense of loss, of lost opportunities, of being somehow, a feeling of being somehow rejected by one's own country as one was striving to be who one felt that you were actually inside. So I absorbed all that, and that's what set me on the path of really trying to understand the phenomenon that led to my being born in Washington, D.C. and raised in that circumstance, and to understand what made 6 million people flee the Jim Crow South, in some ways defecting a caste system there and seeking political asylum within the rest of the country.
You dedicate the book to your dad. Tell us about your father.
Yes, that's his picture to my right. He was a Tuskegee Airman. He, along with the others who went through that training and that program there, you know, these were some of the brightest young men in the country at that time. And yet after the war, they were not permitted to work in their chosen field, the field that they clearly were eminently qualified to pursue. But they were, you know, after the war, they entered a country that was still in the grip of formal Jim Crow, formal, what I call caste system, in which everything that a person could or could not do was based upon their lineage, what they look like, what their perceived rank in the society was. And so he, like all of the other other pilots, had to find other means of making a living. In other words, they had to forego their dreams of being pilots, and they had to go. Many of them went back to school for second degrees. My father was among them, and he became a civil engineer. He became literally the builder of bridges. He was on the team that built some of the tunnels and bridges in the Washington, D.C. area. And so I'm literally the daughter of the builder of bridges, and I feel that I've inherited that legacy of seeking to connect and to transcend the artificial barriers that have been built around us to try to transcend them.
Isabel, you also dedicate the book to your late husband. Tell us about him.
Well, it's so difficult to really talk about losses as massive as what I have been through. They came one right after the other. I can only say that I just feel so blessed to have been able to have known such a beautiful, beautiful soul who was literally, as my mother, who was a really tough person, said that he was love. And my mother was very tough to please, and she was someone who viewed him as the embodiment of love, and that's how I choose to remember.
Am I correct that he was white?
Yes.
And did that make life difficult for the two of you?
Yes, it was very, very challenging, and that's one of the reasons why I say that it's so important to recognize that individuals can find ways to transcend the barriers that we have inherited, and that individuals can find ways to to forego and to reject all of the assumptions that have been made about any particular group of people, and that's how I choose to remember him.
And you did that through your writing, it seems to me. You've broken barriers through your writing that you may have confronted in your marriage, in your societal interactions. You know, in Caste, you tell a story that our reviewers in the previous hour mentioned as you were a reporter for the New York Times, going to meet an interviewee, and he rejected the idea that you, a young Black woman, could possibly be a writer for the New York Times. It was a shocking story. Did he ever allow you to interview him, or did you just leave?
No, there was no interview at all. He, you know, as I described in the book, you know, I had made arrangements to interview several people for this one story that was a very, you know, ordinary story. It was not controversial in any way. In fact, everyone that I reached out to in advance was excited to participate. It was a chance to get, you know, themselves and their businesses in the New York Times. What wasn't to like, I mean, in that case. And so all of the interviews that I'd done during that time, that day, had gone, you know, without incident until I got to the last one. And it was at the last one where I arrived early, a little early, and the man was not there. He again was one of the people that I'd spoken to over the phone to make the arrangement. So he knew that this was an appointment. The clerk who was there told me to wait. He wasn't there, so just have a seat and he'll be here momentarily. And then the door opened and this man rushes in. He's got he's clearly in a hurry. He's anxious. He's, you know, taking his coat off. He's, you know, clearly, you know, got something that he's preparing for. And the clerk told me to go up to him and introduce myself because this was the person I was there to interview. And as soon as I walked up to him, he said, oh, I don't have time to talk with you. I don't have time to talk with you. I have a very, very important interview. I don't have time to talk with you right now. And so I said, I think I may be the interview. I mean, I have an appointment with you. He said, oh, no, you don't understand. This is a very, very important interview with the New York Times. And I said, I am with the New York Times. I'm Isabel Wilkerson. I called you and made the appointment with you for the interview. And he said, how do I know that? And I said, well, we made the appointment and this is the time. And in fact, we're a little behind the time and we should be interviewing right now. And he said, well, do you have a business card? And I happen not to have any business cards. It was the end of the day, so I didn't have any cards left. And I said, I happen not to have any business cards, but you know, I have my notebook. We have the appointment. Your clerk knows that we were supposed to have the interview. No one else is here. It's just me. And he said, well, I'll need to see some ID. And I said, well, I shouldn't have to show you ID, but here's my driver's license. He looked at the driver's license and he said, you don't have anything with the New York Times on it. And I said, I shouldn't have to. I'm here to interview you. There's no one else here. Time has passed and we're wasting time when I should be interviewing you. And he said, I'm gonna have to ask you to leave because she'll be here any minute.
Wow.
So no, there was no interview. And one of the reasons I included that is because it's a reminder of what is lost on all sides. When we have absorbed the messaging and programming that comes with a caste hierarchy such as ours. Here was someone who wanted very much to be in the New York Times. He was so anxious to get ready for this person that he wanted to clear the space for this person, not realizing that the person was right there. He missed out on an opportunity to have you know, his name and his company in the New York Times. I missed out on the chance to be able to include him. I'd wanted to include him. It turned out that I was able to finish the story without him. I'd interviewed all these other people, so it wasn't as if I wasn't able to complete it. But this shows you, if you multiply this times, you know, thousands of interactions on any given day, anywhere in the country, across many industries, and you realize the missed opportunities for engagement, interaction, then you realize the cost, the one way of looking at the cost to our entire country as a result of these embedded hierarchies.
And surely that was not the first time the idea of caste versus race came into your mind. How did that begin for you?
Yes, that is such a good question because, as I say in the book, this is not a book that I wanted to write. This is not a book that I had, long planned or thought about writing after finishing The Warmth of the Suns. It's something that called to me. It's something that demanded to be written because of the times in which we live. And after, I should say that, preface this by saying that anyone who's read The Warmth of the Suns has been exposed to the idea of caste. Caste is the language that I use in The Warmth of the Suns. It was the most comprehensive way of understanding the infrastructure that was in place in the Jim Crow South to keep the people who were assigned to the very bottom in a fixed place at the very bottom of the hierarchy, and to erect these almost impenetrable barriers and boundaries between those who established themselves as dominant versus those who were consigned to the bottom. And so that's one way that the language of caste was something that I came to as a result of trying to recreate that world of the Jim Crow South, so that modern day readers could begin to imagine and to conjure what was it like to live in that world, a world in which it was against the law for a Black person and a white person merely to play checkers together in Birmingham, a world where the very word of God, the Bible itself, was segregated in courtrooms throughout the South. There was a Black Bible and altogether separate white Bible to swear to tell the truth on in court. These great lengths to which the authorities, the powers that be, went in order to keep the groups ranked separate, apart at all costs. And so it turned out that anthropologists who were studying the Jim Crow South, who actually risked their lives to study and to do field work in the Jim Crow South, emerged from their work using the language of caste. And so I became aware of that for The Warmth of the Suns. And then after that book had come out, and in 2012, there was, what I would consider to be the first of this modern day wave of metronome of names of African Americans. It became hashtags as rallying cries around the violence by authorities and others against African Americans doing quite ordinary things. And this was the case of Trayvon Martin. And it was the case of Trayvon Martin that sparked attention around the country, but also spoke directly to the work that I'd done, because Trayvon Martin happened to have been killed in the same region of Florida that one of the characters and one of the protagonists in The Warmth of the Suns was from. So I knew the area intimately. And so that instantly, got my attention. And I also realized that people were at a loss in some ways of how to characterize what had happened, because George Zimmerman did not fit the assumptions about when we think about racism. He was not white. He was Latinx. So he didn't fit the Black-white paradigm that we often think of for race and racism. And so it turned out that the phenomenon of caste helped to enlighten us on how it's the maintenance of the hierarchy by whomever positions him or herself in the power of enforcing it that matters as much, if not more, than the particular race or identity of the person. And so I actually wrote a piece, an op-ed piece for the New York Times about that. And that's what began me on this journey, a reluctant one, to go deeper into the phenomenon that I had first begun using in The Warmth of the Suns.
To what extent do you believe the election of Barack Obama brought on that heightened tension that you describe that white people began to feel toward African Americans?
Well, the 2008 election occurred at the same time that the census had revealed or announced its projection that by the year 2042, the United States would no longer have the same ethnic or demographic configuration that it has known for as long as there's been the United States of America. In other words, the census projected that by the year 2042, the historic white majority that the United States has known for as long as it's been a nation would no longer be in the majority, that there would be no racial majority. And this set off, in many people's belief, a sense of existential crisis among some, at the same time that the United States, that the country elected its first African-American president. And we should remind ourselves and always remember that he was elected, obviously he was elected soundly and with a very, very solid majority, but it so happens that he, like other Democrats who've run for president since 1964, did not win a majority of the white vote. He won, like other Democrats since 1964, won with just enough in order to win the presidency, but did not win the majority of the white vote. So that is a reminder that we are still facing a deep, deep divide in our country, both politically, economically, socially, and 2008 was one of those reminders of that. This was a challenge to the historic role that African Americans, people of African descent, had been assigning to the very bottom of the hierarchy. This was one of the greatest challenges to a caste system or to the hierarchy as we've known it. And we also know now that we're on the other side that it did set in for a response. Generally, progress by those who've been assigned to the very bottom has often been met with resistance, resentment, and often backlash. Both, the backlash to Reconstruction after the Civil War, backlash to the gains of the Civil Rights era, and then backlash to the progress that was symbolized by 2008.
But Isabel, how did race come to be the criteria for what you regard as our caste system?
Yes, well, I should say that caste essentially is an artificial, arbitrary, graded ranking of human value in a society. And it is what determines one's standing, respect, benefit of the doubt, which I must emphasize is critical, because benefit of the doubt is the precise thing that has been withheld from many of the people that we see being attacked, assaulted, and in fact killed at the hands of authorities. But also caste determines one's access to resources or denial of access to resources, assumptions of competence, intelligence, and worthiness even, whether a person will be received and protected by the authorities or actually attacked by the authorities. And so this dates back to the founding of our country, and in fact predates the founding of our country. It goes back to the colonies of the Chesapeake. It goes back to colonial America, where the British colonists, established themselves obviously as the top of the hierarchy. They decimated the numbers of indigenous people, drove indigenous people from the land, and then brought in Africans to do the work of building this country out of wilderness, and in so doing, to keep this entire group of people at the very bottom of an emerging hierarchy, essentially assigned people to the bottom on the basis of a particular metric. Any caste system uses a particular metric to determine what the ranking and division should be. It could be religion, it could be ethnicity, it could be place of origin, language, any number of things. In our society, you know, in the early colonies, the metric that was used to divide and to rank people was what people looked like, which was shorthand for lineage, which became what we now view as race. Race had no meaning, had no reason for existing in, you know, thousands of years ago, where people were, restricted essentially to being around people like themselves. So that they might use any number of ways of describing themselves. They might describe themselves as Irish or as Polish or whatever it might have been. But they had no reason, if you're surrounded by people who look like yourself, to identify themselves by the thing that everyone actually has. And so it was only when people come onto this one and into the new world, bringing people from all corners of the planet, looking different from themselves, that it was the physical manifestations, the physical characteristics that should have no meaning whatsoever, but were assigned a meaning in a society that needed or felt it needed to have the hard work of building a country out of wilderness, and needing to have this group of people who would do it, who would do this work without pay. They use this metric that we now have come to accept as almost like the laws of nature, even though they're not, the idea of race, which is a manufactured construct made by man. And that is what was used. That was the metric that has been used to create the hierarchy in our country.
So why do you think it's important to understand inequality in this country through this particular lens? Why is it so important?
Thank you for asking. I think it's critical because it's a reminder that we have to remember that caste is, as a concept, is thousands of years old. It predates our concept of race. Caste reminds us that there are points of intersection between our country and our social order and the social order of other countries that have had embedded ranking and hierarchy. And it is stunning in the course of working on this book to have been able to compile 8 different pillars of caste, 8 different pillars of this phenomenon that looking at India first and foremost, the world's oldest caste system, accepted and unacknowledged caste system, and then to look at the chillingly concentrated 12-year reign of the Nazis, which had many of the hallmarks of caste, and then to look at our own country and to see that there are points of intersection between all 3 of these societies. Different though they are not the same. There's nothing is saying that they're the same. There are many, many differences between these 3 societies. But there are these points of intersection, and it's the idea that we can learn something by looking at the ways in which we overlap, and that there are some shockingly similar characteristics that we would be wise to recognize so that we can get beneath what we think we see in our own country.
I think I was most stunned to read that in your book, Caste, that the Nazis really looked to America as they began working on how to separate those purists, they called, of the Aryan race from the rest. Why did they look to America? Why did Hitler think the clues lay in this country?
Well, it was just, stunning to discover this. I only began looking at Germany after Charlottesville, because in Charlottesville, the people who were protesting the possible removal of the statue of Robert E. Lee merged these different symbols of the Confederacy and of Nazi Germany in a way that most Americans would never dream of doing. And yet they recognized, even if other Americans didn't, the connection between these two countries, these two regimes. And so in setting about to try to understand what is it that Germany had done in the years after the war to to understand, to reconcile, to incorporate that history and the memory of what happened into their own society. Digging deeper and looking and studying and learning, I was just stunned to realize that that it turned out that German eugenicists were in constant dialogue with American eugenicists in the years leading up to the war, that German eugenicists looked to American eugenicists for the work and for the rhetoric and the work that they were doing, particularly when it comes to immigration, restrictions on where people from outside of North and Western Europe could their access to the United States. Then it turned out that American eugenicists were writing these books that were huge bestsellers in Germany, and that they were so popular, the Nazis were incorporating these books into the curriculum for German children. That's how popular the books written by American eugenicists were with the Nazis. And then the Nazis actually sent researchers to the United States to study how the United States had managed to first decimate the numbers of its indigenous people and then to subjugate African Americans in this country. And that was because they could not find any other advanced level of jurisprudence that contained and restricted and defined race in the same way that the United States had. And they were fascinated to study it. They were particularly interested in the anti-miscegenation laws, the laws that forbade marriage across racial lines, and in the ways in which the laws restricted and also the lynchings and the violence that went along with it. They were fascinated. And the definition of race as well was something that they were.
Some might infer that you are saying that Nazi Germany rose and annihilated millions of people because of what America had done. Are you saying that?
No one could say that. No one could ever say that. The Nazis didn't need anyone to teach them how to hate. Absolutely not. They did not need anyone to teach them how to hate. They came with an eye toward hatred already, and were looking for a pretext. They were looking for something that would allow them to actually create the laws that would presumably give them a cover for what they ultimately were going to do. And they found the jurisprudence, they found the laws. The laws were far more advanced here in this country than they were anywhere else. We should remind ourselves that many people will bring up South Africa as a relevant example of extreme racial law. But we should remind ourselves that the United States, sadly, it's shocking to realize that the United States predated apartheid. When people make reference to and say something that we have here is like apartheid in South Africa, or people often say Jim Crow apartheid, that actually is not chronologically correct, because the United States predated South Africa by many, many, many decades. Apartheid did not go into effect until 1948. And so for that reason, the Nazis, when they were scouring the globe looking for presumed examples that they could use to create what would ultimately be the Nuremberg laws, the United States was more advanced in that, and that's where they turned you might say, the beginnings of. They were looking for a blueprint. They didn't follow it exactly. In fact, shockingly, one of the things that they did not accept was the American definition of race. They were interested to see how they could define race, and it turned out that, as many of us know, many of the states, and we should say the majority of the states, at one point or the other, had laws against intermarriage. And in doing so, they had to define who would be Black and who would be white. And in many of the states, particularly those in the South, they defined one drop of blood as enough to make a person Black. That definition was something that the Nazis did not accept. They preferred 25%, They had several different variations of what it could be, but they did not accept that. So this is what they were looking for. And I want to emphasize that they did not need to learn how to hate from the United States at all. They knew that, and they came here looking for a pretext to do what they wanted to do.
Here's a question from someone who is listening in to this conversation. What is an example of the language of caste, and how is it different from, or is it different from, the language of racism?
Yeah, well, caste is about boundaries and placement and the idea that groups are to remain in their place. The idea when we think about, it has to do with roles. If we think about caste without an E, I got to be really fascinated with the etymology of this. If you think about caste without an E, you think about the apparatus that we place on an arm to keep the broken or fractured bones in place, caste, something that keeps people in a fixed place. We also think about the cast in a play, and we can imagine the stage. And on the stage, there's someone stage right, stage left, in the foreground and the background. And everyone there is given, there's a script, and there are lines that each person in that play is to speak. And as as a person who, if everyone who's in the play knows what they're supposed to say, and if they really are deeply invested in maintaining the play, they're really into the play, they will know everyone's lines. And if anyone speaks out of their line, out of turn, or moves out of place, then it throws the entire production off, because the production requires everyone to know their place, everyone to know their lines. So anything that's keeping people in a fixed place is, in some ways, it's one basic hallmark of what a caste system is. And that's one of the things that we've been seeing in recent years, where there are all these videos of people in what I call the dominant caste identifying or feeling that someone who's from what would be called the subordinated caste out of their place. It could be someone, as we saw, a man at Central Park, and a woman came up to, a woman resented his saying something about her dog. He was a bird watcher. Right. And she called the police on him because he was out of line for intruding upon what she felt was, he stepped out of his place. There was a case of a young man who was a businessman who was walking trying to get into his condo building in St. Louis. And as he was trying to get in, there was a woman from what I call the dominant caste who blocked him from getting into the building because she felt he didn't belong there. And she demanded to know where he lived in the building before she would permit him in. Now, this is not a sign of fear on her part, because she actually followed him. He opened the door with his key and was trying to get in, and into the lobby, and walked through the lobby. And then she followed him onto the elevator, asking him at every point. She felt safe enough to get in that lobby elevator with him, and asked him incessantly, where do you live here? I've not seen you before. I need to know where you live. I need to know which unit you're in. And she followed him all the way to his floor. So this is not out of fear. This was out of a sense of, he is out of his place. He does not belong here. Of course, that is also what happened to Trayvon Martin, where he was seen as not being someone who should be in that neighborhood. George Zimmerman said he's up to no good if he's in this neighborhood. And so this can be a matter of life and death. But on a more routine level, it's this policing and enforcing of who belongs where in a society.
And on that very point, a question from a listener: is it human nature to create hierarchies? They seem ubiquitous at work, religious institutions, clubs, etc. Why do we find them so necessary to maintain order?
I believe a lot of it has to do, those most vulnerable to the need for hierarchy can often be traced, I think, to insecurity, a sense of perceived sense of scarcity of whatever the resources may be, and a need to harness or hoard or connect or protect resources for oneself, a fear that there's not enough for everybody, and thus that there needs to be some control over who has access to those resources because there will not be enough. Also a sense of investment in what one has absorbed as the presumed dominance, the birthright of dominance, which is one of the things that could be said, that could be at work, I believe, when what we saw January 6th, where people felt so desperate to maintain their perceived birthright of inherited dominance that has been passed down through generations, reinforced by society, messages at every societal level, and to maintain this at all costs, even at the price of democracy itself. And so all of these things do speak to a potential vulnerability in the species, you might say, by those who are the least feel the least secure in a society, to want to dominate and control others. But we find that more egalitarian societies benefit in so many ways. We have to remind ourselves that many of our peer nations do not live with the same level of discord, and I might say more particularly violence that comes with these divisions. The majority of guns owned by civilians, in the hands of civilians throughout the world, the majority of them are owned by Americans. There's something about the deep divisions that can come with this embedded hierarchy that can make people feel less of a connection to their fellow citizens, have less of a sense of generosity of spirit toward one another. And so we suffer in ways that we often don't recognize. The idea of this moment that the United States, with our advanced technology and the advancement in so much of innovation, and yet here we are bearing one of the grimmest of distinctions, and that is that we have the highest number of recorded COVID deaths in the world. And there's no reason for that, logically speaking. There is no reason for it. And we're at something close to, I think, 565,000, more than 500,000 Americans have lost their lives in this pandemic. And the next highest country is Brazil, which is in a tremendous humanitarian crisis. And we have to recognize that they too are living under the shadow of slavery as a foundation for their own divisions as well. And so there's something about a deeply divided society that can breed this lack of compassion, lack of fellow feeling for fellow citizens, to the detriment of everyone. To the detriment of all.
In the book, you write, a group whipped into narcissistic fervor is eager to have a leader with whom it can identify. And our listener says that might be the most important quote in the book to sum up the rise of Trumpism. Has the mainstream media reported this angle enough? Are we seeing this more in Black media?
I can't really speak to how it's being covered by the media in general, because I'm in the midst of an active book tour, and I'm very focused on what I'm doing here, while also trying to keep track of what's going on in the news that affects all of us. So I can't speak to how it's being covered in that respect. I do know that there's so many readers who have really been inspired by or moved by certain passages in the book, and I will see them excerpted at various times, particularly on Instagram. They make their own quote boxes, and it's just an incredible thing to see. I think that people are are clearly awakening from a sense of not many Americans who do not have to think about this on a daily basis, as do those who are the targets of the caste system, who have been historically the targets of the caste system, who have to who are watching the videos, these horrific videos of police of people dying at the hands of police, as not theoretical, but as part of their life, their daily lives, something that every person of African descent has to contemplate and act and to anticipate and to live with somehow. And for those who don't, or have had the luxury of not having to think about it every day, this is something that has gotten the attention of people, needed to get the attention of people. People have needed to awaken from complacency to recognize how this is occurring, that this is real, that there are many, many people in America who should not have to be experiencing this and yet are traumatized on a daily basis, each new one, as we know. While the world and the country were awaiting the verdict in the trial in Minnesota, there was a 16-year-old girl who was shot by the police in Columbus, Ohio at 4:30 yesterday. I mean, it is just these encounters, these deadly encounters are in some ways, it's a chilling and traumatizing reminder for those who bear the brunt of the caste system, those who have been targeted by the caste system historically. It's a traumatizing reminder of the place of African Americans, of Black people in our country historically and even now, which again is the whole idea of caste to begin with, is to stay in your place, to be reminded of your place.
But in light of the decision in the George Floyd trial, how might our country embrace what we read in your book, Caste, to move forward? Yesterday's decision was just a single one after a mountain of other decisions that have gone against African Americans. Is yesterday's decision an opportunity to move forward, and how do we as a country embrace it?
Well, I think that we need to recognize that, how rare what happened yesterday truly is. And when we realize how rare it is, then we're also reminded that it is not about one person. This one person is now, it may be headed to jail, but it's an entire system that is culpable for what happened. It takes many, many things to occur for something as horrendous as that to happen. It should not happen in any civilized nation. It should not happen to any human being ever under any circumstances. And yet we saw this happen before our very eyes in the video. And we now know that there had to been, we've been subjected to, the weeks of testimony that showed that the very arrest itself was not necessary because the offense was not even an arrestable offense. It was an offense that would have been merely a citation normally. And so this is a reminder that this is systemic, that it's not about one person. You think about the officers who were there who did not intervene, who did not do anything, the sense of fear and intimidation that was exerted onto those who were the bystanders, their helplessness.
The courage of one 17-year-old girl to keep her camera going.
Absolutely.
I thought that was absolutely extraordinary. We have a question from Gina in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. She says, I really enjoyed the book and learned a lot. I wish my family and friends in the U.S., especially those in my rural hometown in Ohio, would take time to read it. What advice do you have for specific points I can casually bring up to try to educate them on issues addressed in the book. What are your tips for specific steps I can take to make a difference? I'm sure a lot of people feel that way, Isabel.
Well, in working on the book, I describe myself as a building inspector who's come to deliver a report on the state of this old house that we call our country. And the goal of this is to allow us to recognize our respective responsibilities in moving us forward. Because this is a 400-year-old infrastructure. And, when you have an old house, you never expect the work to be over. If you're being realistic, you know that the work is never over. I think that the goal of this is to remind people that while those of us alive today did not build this structure, we alive today are the ones who are responsible for it. And if you think about how you manage an old house or even a human body, you realize that there's so much to say about the book, but I can say, one of the reasons that I have the metaphors in there is to allow us to recognize that if we think about our country as if it were an old house or if it was a human body, you would never assume that you do one thing and it's all done. You would never assume, I got a new furnace back in 1983, and so now I'm all done. I'll never have to think about anything related to the house again. And then you realize that there are multiple systems in the house, and those systems have to constantly be maintained. They have to constantly be reassessed, repaired, and sometimes you redo the entire wiring in a house. I mean, so there are many, many things that we can do. I don't present myself as having all the answers. It took everything out of me just to write what I did. Sure. I described this book as it's not an argument. It's a diagnosis and it's a prayer for our country. And if we take it as that, then it's the jumping off point toward understanding so that we together can come up with solutions.
I wonder how you personally feel about the idea of reparations.
Oh, absolutely. I feel that, well, first of all, I think The Warmth of the Suns and Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents are exhibit A and B in the case for reparations, because my belief is that if people truly knew the history of our country, then even the skeptics would be calling for reparations. I think that one of the reasons why so many people in recent years have said such things as, I don't recognize my country, this is not what the country stands for, this is not America. Well, I think that when people say that, they really, truly, sadly don't know enough of our country's history. Because if we knew our country's history, then we would recognize that actually this has been the country for far longer than it is not. I just want to remind people of a couple of ways of thinking about enslavement alone. And that is that slavery went on for so long. It was not a sad chapter in our country's history at all. It was the country for far longer than we would like to believe it to be. It lasted for 246 years, 12 generations. How many greats do we have to add to the word grandparent to begin to comprehend how long slavery lasted on this soil? Slavery lasted for so long that it will not be until next year, 2022, that the United States will have been a free and independent nation for as long as slavery lasted on this soil. That's how long it lasted. And another way to think about it is that no adult alive today will be alive at the point at which African Americans will have been free for as long as African Americans were enslaved. That will not happen until the year 2111. That's how long it will take. And so one of the goals of my work is to get people to recognize this history. I can say for a fact that after The Warmth of the Suns came out, people would say to me time and time again, I had no idea this happened in our country. I had no idea it happened in the state that they might have been from. They might have said, I had no idea it happened in the lifetime for people I might have spoken to. And so this is the way, one of the things I'm hoping, that I really hope comes out of this is that, when you think about, what history is, History is merely, in some ways, what, you know, if you think about going into a movie theater and there on the screen, you've come into the theater in the middle of the movie, and there on the screen is a bus that's chasing a car that's chasing a motorcycle. And because you've come in the middle of the movie, you don't understand why the bus is chasing the car that's chasing the motorcycle. And you could watch to the end of the movie and still not know why the bus was chasing the car that's chasing the motorcycle. And, you know, now we can go back and, you know, we stream things and we can go back and we can see it from the beginning. And that really is what history is. History is merely what happened in the movie before you entered the theater. And so we will never understand where we are right now or where we need to go or be able to make the wisest possible decisions unless we know how we got to where we are, to see what happened in the movie before we entered the theater.
And one person wants to know, what impact do you think an apology for slavery and Jim Crow by the President of the United States would have on America's caste system?
I think that in the same way that there were many, many forces that led us to this current moment. It's a 402-year-old system that we're laboring under, who's this shadow over us. And there's not one single thing that will be the one thing that can be done. In the same way with an old house, or the same way if you get a difficult diagnosis in terms of health, there's not one thing you do. It's all the things that are necessary. It's a package of things that need to be done. And I want to emphasize that, as I said, I think that if people knew the true history of our country, even the skeptics would be calling for reparations. Reparations, I want to say, emphasizing the verb in it, not just a single thing. It's not a state, it is an action of repair, atoning. And not just for those who have been the targets of the caste system, targets of the descendants of enslavement, but for the karmic atonement for the country. It's as if we are living under a cloud that goes back for centuries because we have not atoned as a country for what has happened. It's like we cannot go forward until we atone as a country. And I think that
hope. Do you feel hope for that?
I feel that hope is warranted so long as people learn the history, because unless people know the history, then they will not understand why this is necessary. I just want to say that, you know, my work took me to Berlin, and in the middle of a major world city, there's a massive, massive structure that takes up several football fields, as it should. And it is the memorial to those who perished in the Holocaust. And one thing that's distinctive about it is that there's no signage. And there's no signage because it's not necessary. The people learn the history from the earliest time when they're in school. They've converted the places of horror into places of learning. So they've not destroyed the history. They have preserve the history for the sake of never, ever allowing it to happen again. There's no signage with that particular memorial because people know the history. And therefore, I believe that whatever changes we seek to make, whatever progress we seek to make, is only as strong as the recognition by people in the country as to why the changes needed to be made in the first place. We have seen that all of the progress that might have been made was made, in fact, in the 1960s, can only be as strong as the will of the people to maintain it. And the will of the people to maintain it is only as strong as how deeply they know the true history of why it was necessary to begin with. We've seen that the Voting Rights Act has been watered down and in peril because people are not aware of why it was necessary to begin with. And that's the reason why I think history is necessary. Learning and education is necessary to go along with whatever reparations package is agreed upon, because nothing is going to be safe and secure. And our country's future, I believe, is not safe and secure unless we know how we got to where we are, so that we can have a firmer, fairer, more just future for everyone.
And a fine way to do that is to read Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, The Origin of Our Discontents. Isabel, thank you so very much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Lovely to be with you.
Thank you.
And before you go, please take a moment to fill out our short survey about this event that's going to pop up on your screen. Our next book club meeting will be on Wednesday, May 26th. I'll be discussing Finding the Mother Tree, Discovering the Wisdom of the Forest with the author, pioneering forest ecologist, Suzanne Simard. Stay tuned to your email for more details. Thank you all so much for joining us today. It's been my pleasure to be with you. Thank you and have a great day.